everyone. We are just getting starting. We're seeing that there are some more participants that are coming on. If by chance you hop on and your video comes on, go ahead and turn your video off, but make sure that your audio is on. And if at any point during this webinar, the audio, something technical happens, just message in on the side and we'll try to fix that. So so this is a very informal Q&A session that we're doing here. We decided to do this after getting a lot of calls and emails in asking questions that other individuals were also asking. So we decided to throw this together over the holidays to see if we can support you all. So, so I'm Sarah Setti. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Green Rush Consulting, and this is my partner, Zeta Setti, CEO and founder of Green Rush Consulting. Just a real quick background, if you haven't met us before, we have been helping out with helping people win applications, licenses for 7 years now, 8 years. And hi, you can go ahead and if you want to turn your video off. So we've been doing these license applications for 7, 8 years, being very successful, helping people win the licenses. And yeah, now we're changing things up to provide our services to a larger amount of people to really help to get more people in to winning licenses. So how we're going to do this is basically I'm going to read some of the frequently asked questions that we've received, and if you have questions, which I really hope you do, go ahead and put them over in the chat, and I'll be sure to read them, and Zeta is going to answer them for us.
So just real quickly, you know, so anybody that's coming in, if they could just turn your, mute your volume and then actually turn your video off, right? So this way it can be anonymous for everybody.
Yeah, we got a bunch of Sarah Settis here, so sorry about that, guys. I'm all over the place. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, if you have any questions, please put that in the chat. I know you're here. Yeah. If you're here, you have questions. So please feel free to ask them. Other people will want to know as well. And then if you have questions after this, please email us at, if you haven't received an email from Lee yet, you would email Lee, L-Y, at greenrushconsulting.com, and we're going to be sure that we're providing support for you guys pretty much through the finish line here. So, so Zeta, you ready? You ready to get started?
Go ahead.
All right, so let me get my questions up here. All right, so first one is a good one. It's about redacting. So, and I'm sure that this is going to come up for a lot of people with specific questions around redacting. This one is, should we redact the labor peace agreement? How would we anonymize it otherwise, as Exhibit Q requires anonymity? Instructions say redaction should only be used on capitalization documents and the security contracts.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, that's a fair question, but the state, refused to answer this clearly. I mean, they just haven't answered this, but they said the following things via, in the Q&A sessions that they released, is that Exhibit Q, must be anonymous, that it should include the labor peace agreements, and that Exhibit Q's contract should be redacted. Okay, and that includes whoever the principal officers are, the applicant, business name, these kinds of things. However, they also have said that more than once in the Q&As, the only documents that can be redacted are supporting financial documents, the security vendor contract, and the rest of the application does not include any mention of the applicant, right? So we know that there's inline anonymity inside each exhibit, so you only want to use titles and not specific names. For folks that had gotten the application accelerator or any of the exhibits in the accelerator bundle, we've already done this for you, right? So as you go through, you're just putting in the titles. But because of the lack of clarity, it's hard to give a solid answer, because the state hasn't given us a solid answer in it. But it's always good to just go ahead and do it, because we don't think that or at least in any state that we participated in, doing too much is better than not enough. And even then, let's just say that you submitted a document that was supposed to be redacted. We believe that the state will give you a deficiency letter, and then you got 5 days to correct that, right? So they'll probably identify that in the deficiency letter in the case that you don't. So you got a second chance, more than likely, to make that correction if you don't do it and get a deficiency letter.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zeta.
Excuse me,
And
not 5 days. It's 10 days. It's 10 days. Sorry, it's not 5 days. It's 10 days for the deficiencies.
10 days.
Plenty of time.
And just to kind of re-clarify or restate that we always, for redaction, we use the motto that if there's a question, redact it, just to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely names and, just rereading those instructions on what's required for those specific is best way to go. Okay, so another question. We have a security consultant, Zeta, if you look at 50, question 50, we have a security consultant in California that subcontracts an Illinois licensed security guard provider. The contract states RAS can provide staffing and is properly licensed in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Is the PDF attached RAS Master Consulting adequate to satisfy the required contract for the security plan?
Well, I mean, under the obligations, portion of the agreement, it mentions that the vendor is responsible for being licensed in Illinois, but nowhere does it say they are currently licensed. I think the agreement only references their California license, right? So that's specific to this particular group. But we strongly recommend contracting with a currently licensed Illinois security provider. I mean, anytime you're applying in any state, you always want to try to focus locally as much as possible, unless it has something to do with a new state you got to bring in that experience from another state. That's okay. But as much as possible, from how you develop your LLC, is established in the state, to working with multiple different vendors or contractors, or even your legal, all that should be located within the state. And there's many reasons for that, because you want to try to leverage as many relationships as possible that are local. If that's not possible, then we recommend talking to a security provider and confirming that, they're going to get an Illinois license, right? I mean, I think that was probably be the next, best thing to do. And then we recommend including mentioning in your security plan that your provider intends to become, licensed in the state of Illinois, but is currently licensed in the state of California. Right. So this way, the department's going to know that, hey, these guys are actually making the effort to be licensed in the state of Illinois, but due to like the time length of being able to do that, maybe they weren't able to do that. Right. Again, if there's any problem with that, more than likely you're going to receive a deficiency letter, and then you have 10 days to correct it. So as you're going through that process, if you have an out-of-state security provider that's not licensed in the state of Illinois, I would recommend continuing to go forward with that, or telling them that you need this done in order to be ready just in case you get a deficiency or that's a problem.
Great. So let's stay on security for a minute. We've got a couple questions from the group. Should we include security guard contract and security build out contract?
This is a really interesting question. I've had a couple different viewpoints on this. I mean, most folks think that and legal attorneys and people that we've talked to think that it's just armed guard services contract that you're going to need to submit for the application. I don't think it's going to hurt to have both, right? Because you just have to have, but you have to have it. You have to have either one or the other. But I think in terms of precedence, I would probably do security armed guard contract, and then you could compound it with the other one in terms of equipment and surveillance and hardware. So ideally though, at least one of those, and that one should be armed guard services.
Okay. And we do have some suggestions if you're still needing the boots on the ground security services. There is a company called Embassy Security, and we do know that they are still taking on clients. Mm-hmm. And then there's another company called Sapphire Risk, where they do the writing portion of it. And then if you contract them for the full contract, I believe that they can also help you set up with the boots on the ground. But it's very important to understand the difference between the writing portion and the actual boots on the ground. What the state is asking for the contract is the boots on the ground. They don't need to know who wrote it basically with you. So embassy security, and I'll just put that in the comments as a resource real quick right here, so you guys can, if I'm able to do that. Oh, it's not letting me do it. I'm not sure why. Maybe Sam, if you could do that. Embassysecurity.net is it? Okay. Second question: in the security plan document, can you mention the name of the supplier of systems, alarms, and other equipment? And must they be redacted?
Oh, actually, in the exhibit. So I think that like that is not a piece or what they defined as a piece of identifying information, right? The identifying information is business plan, person's names, principal officers' names, the applicant's name. Though that is identifying information. When it comes to security provider, we don't believe that is something that needs to be redacted. But again, you could also say security company there too as well, just to be safe. But they haven't given a clear definition. Is that okay? We need to redact all vendors. Other than that, that would be in the regulations, right? So it's really important to make sure that all the titles, all the principal officers, business names, or applicant's name is what needs to be redacted, or not even redacted, just not even mentioned. It's just you just can say applicant, or you can say just the title, security director or security company. All these are really, really important interchangeable titles that you use to make sure that everything's clear. So it's always better to do it and not do it. So I think that in my case, or my thoughts and opinion, I would go ahead and do that, but I don't think it's going to hurt to not do it.
Right. Okay, great. All right, there are no silly questions. So one person is asking, are they really expecting us to fit everything into one 9x12 manila envelope? This is a great question, and it's not silly at all. Do you know or have any information on how we can submit? So Zeta, before you go into the details on the actual submission process, I want to let you know that this is a very different submission process than Illinois 5 years ago, in which it had to all be printed and there were no page counts, page limits. And so literally the applicants were running to the finish line with boxes of paper.
Yeah, that was 2015.
So we have progressed as an industry and have put some sustainability practices into place. So Zeta, why don't you go ahead and share about the actual technical submission? Like what does that look like?
Not a problem. So again, as Sarah stated, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. Well, last time, like she said, it was a major submission process, meaning boxes of this information printed out. But also we don't have this time around where we have an online portal submission where it's electronic. It is a hand deliver submission. But when we look at putting it into a 9x12 clasp but not sealed envelope, meaning you don't lick the envelope, you only clasp it. And it's a manila envelope and it needs to be labeled correctly. So
is that right? They tell you not to lick it?
Don't seal it. Don't seal it. Make sure the most important thing is that you got to follow every single instruction to the T to ensure that you don't have any problems with submission. So this includes things like labeling. So labeling the outside and the exterior envelope, you want to put in the name of the applicant. You don't want to put in the name of the BLS region, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics region that you're applying in. Based on the map, is it 47? Is it 2? Is it 3? All these different, BLS regions. On the application itself, you can indicate the number of licenses that you're applying for. So let's just say you're applying in Chicago and you want to do 2 licenses, right? Well, all you need to do is submit 1 application, but you have your money order written in terms of like the payment to the non-refundable payment to the department. You can actually consolidate that, so it doesn't have to just necessarily be 2,500 or 5,000. It could be 10,000, and then you just indicate on your application I'm applying for 2 licenses. It would also labeling on the outside is the name of the applicant's primary and alternate contact info, the phone number for the primary and alternate contact info, and the email address, right? So all this needs to be labeled on the outside. So when it comes down to it, they're not asking you to print all this out and stick it in a 9x12 envelope. And what it is just essentially the non-refundable fee that you pay the department in money order form. It can only be money order. It can't be a personal check. And then the digital drive that's inside of that manila envelope. So it's not going to be some bulky envelope. It's only the digital drive in this. I do believe that it's also things like a photocopy, the physical copies. This is what must be inside that envelope. Okay, so the actual physical copies, right? So it's the cashier's check, money order. It's a photocopy of the cashier's check or money order. So a photocopy of that would also need to be labeled at the top, the code or exhibit name of that too. So after you make a photocopy of it, then you also want to put that exhibit name on top of that so that it's a clear reference to it. And of course, the actual digital thumb drive, and each one needs to be in PDF format. They must be separate files, so it can't be all in one file. And you want to make sure that all that stuff is in there to ensure that it's all evenly. Now they also said don't do anything in terms of like cover pages or anything like that. It just needs to be the actual exhibit, and each in terms of the file name, the exhibits need to be exactly what the exhibit is. Do not do any more than that, right? So if it's exhibit J, it's exhibit J. If it's exhibit B, it's exhibit B.
No cover letters.
Yeah, no cover letters.
No cover letters or dividers. No.
So no hard copies of these exhibits will be accepted. Just so you know.
Going in with that, what is an acceptable font or minimum font size? They don't actually specify a font, so this is an area where it's actually a strategic decision, because there's page limits but not word limits. So what is an acceptable font?
I mean, this is a really interesting part to this process, because usually the state will indicate like what the size font of it is, and typically it's New Times Roman.
Right.
This could be 11, this could be 12. I wouldn't go past 12, and I probably wouldn't go under 10. Right? Because we want the reader and whoever's looking at this to be able to clearly understand it. And I think, in the application accelerator, it is 12. So what's, when it comes down to it, you want to be able to submit something that's very visible and clearly legible, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too big. So I'd say New Times Roman 11 would probably be the best.
Yeah. And for any of you font geeks out there, apparently New Times Roman that has the serif on it, which is the little thing that hangs off it, it is easier for the general population to read. So that's just something. But no wingdings. So okay, let's see. Are all principal officer forms in one PDF in the Exhibit B folder?
Which question was that?
All principal officer forms. So we know that there's a couple exhibits that require principal officer forms.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to that? Are they all in one, in terms of the actual what's going on the jump drive?
Mm-hmm.
Is it all one PDF?
It should be. I think it should be all one exhibit. Yes, and each one needs to be notarized too, as well.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So if you have 5 principal officers, you probably need to take all those forms and put it into a single exhibit. What they want to do is be able to click on that. We know it's that exhibit. It's labeled as that exhibit. And then we have the principal officers form. Then we actually have the notary letter behind it. And so you're going to have to compile that into a single exhibit officers forms. We don't want exhibit and like the same.
Yeah,
like
we want to make it as easy as possible for them.
Yeah.
So compiling them all one exhibit into being the one PDF or one attachment is probably the best way to go. Hopefully you're able to do that. If a hack that I learned actually on an iPhone is if you have one of the newer iPhones, you can actually go to your notes section and there is a scan option there where you can scan a bunch of original documents into one PDF. That's just a little side hack.
Speaking of original documents, I mean, the state's not asking for original documents. I mean, the principal
They're asking for the copies of the electronic version.
Yeah.
But please keep your original documents. Yeah. You guys absolutely, they should all be together in the one place.
Because here's the thing, right? I mean, the reason for that is that as you go through this process, you'll find that principal officers will lose them. So whoever's like the person in, the liaison that's the team leader, they should aggregate and collect all those original documents, but the state's, asking for copies of it. You don't need to submit the original documents with it. And so you make a copy of it, pull them all together into a PDF, and then you submit that as the single exhibit on the actual drive, right?
All
But
right, let's keep going. There's a lot of questions. This is exciting. I'm glad that you guys all have questions. So, what are recommendations on show of funds, escrow, letters of intent, proof of funds?
yeah, I think
All
that
those financials.
well, I mean, if you look at Exhibit O, right, and it has a very straight sentence there saying, for Exhibit O, what you need is a letter of attestation, a signed letter of attestation saying, I, as the applicant, if granted a license, we have sufficient funds or access to sufficient funds to operate a adult use cannabis dispensary. So really, it's about, I think, to score strong in this area. Obviously you have to have this letter of attestation. You're going to draft up this and basically just use the same language that you see on the application. Just use that same language and say, I, as the applicant, will have this, and that's the letter. And then behind that, you can demonstrate proof of capitalization in a few different ways. One way is obviously to take a snapshot of a bank account, showing liquid asset and showing the liquid funds that you have available. Recommendation probably somewhere between 200, 300, 400,000. That shows that you have adequate, financial capability of doing this. Another way is to get a CPA certified letter, which verifies access to these funds. I think the most comprehensive, appropriate way to do this would be to have, your letter, your proof of funds and capitalization, and possibly even a financial projection, right? Your 5-year projection. And then at that 5-year projection, that financial projection, whatever the capital expenditures are and the cost of operation, all that kind of stuff, you just want to make sure you have enough money to cover that, or even more, right? So it demonstrates that, hey, we're looking at our projections. These are the projections that we have across for our dispensary location. And on the other side, we have plenty of proof of capital to show that we can actually do this. Right. So I think that is probably the most complete version of this. And they don't give you a limit of how many documents you can submit in that section. Now, again,
Everything.
Yeah, you need to copy all these, put these on the digital file for Exhibit O, and push all these together into a single file. And that should be good enough to score the highest in that section.
Yeah, a note on that. This is actually an area that we always have questions on in every state, of course, is, what are signs of sufficient capital? So Zeta gave some good suggestions. This is another one of those areas that we just suggest, if you can show it, show it. Letters of intent, anything, if you can show it, show it. The second part of it is that it needs to actually be clear. We would get, snapshots of digital files that, when actually included, would be all fuzzy and blurry. Things like that can actually cost you points. So you want to make sure that those little things are taken care of. So let's continue on the questions that you guys are asking, which are really good. So these are coming from you. We were prepared with a bunch of questions already, but so we're actually throwing them live at you, Zeta.
Okay, so it's live action.
Yeah,
Huh?
that's right. Live action. Okay. Should the application form be a hard copy or just a PDF listed on the file or flash drive? So we kind of went over this a little bit with what you're actually turning in. Zadie, do you want to just reconfirm with what are because I thought, can you confirm that the physical application needs to be printed out, like the actual first couple sheets of the application? Don't those need to be included also?
Yes, they do. I think that, when it comes down to it, you just need to make sure that everything that's on the drive is on the drive. And they give you clear instructions in the application on, what needs to be on that drive and what.
So just read those to a T. Read them over and over, and make sure that you've got a couple people on your team reading that over, because they're very explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so correct. You do not have to print everything. That was one of the questions. It goes on to the jump drive. Only a small handful of actually printed documents. So just reread.
Yeah, that's why they're giving, the manila envelope. I mean, you would think that, I gotta fit all these in them. No, it's not like that at all. It's just a couple little things in there, and that's about it. And that's the reason why they're doing it that way.
Okay. Exhibit N, should we use academic, institution, and business names? Please clarify.
Not at all. I think that, well, academic and business institution names, like,
So Exhibit N is the anonymous knowledge and experience of principal officers.
mhm.
So should we use academic and yes, yeah, I'm gonna say yes. Like so
Yeah,
another way to ask that question is should we redact
yeah,
the
that's what I was trying to
academic
get to.
institution
Yeah.
and or business names? No,
Mhm.
you don't need to do that. That's not a personal identifier, but it is something that shows experience, and that's
Yeah.
what you want to do here is to show the experience. So if you went to U of I and majored in business, I don't know. You want to show that on there for sure. As we know, different institutions have different uh, you know different perspectives about how they are. Yale is
Yeah,
a
I mean,
little
it's just
bit
about
different than a
demonstrating experience in business.
yeah.
I mean, if you have experience, with, working in the cannabis industry, um,
Mhm.
I think that, again, it's such a fine line between identifying factors. I think identifying and being anonymous, the most important things are, are the principal officers and the business applicant name, the person that's applying, right?
Yeah.
So
So
these are the
if the
most important things.
business name, if there is a personal identifier in the business name, you should probably redact it.
Mhm.
I used to have a photography company. It was called Sarah Cross Photography. I could not put that in an application because that's a personal identifier.
Yeah, and in
Hopefully,
this
hopefully
and in
that's
Exhibit
helpful.
N too as well. I mean, there's another really interesting thing in here that talks about, whether or not in your dispensary, you plan on selling paraphernalia, devices, vaporizers, bongs, or edible products, right? So in that exhibit, you want to explain that you are going to be doing that if you are. And so this way they, go maybe a little bit further in detail how the knowledge you have around that. But they specifically state that and whether or not you're going to be doing that or not. So that's important. That's important note to add into that section or that exhibit.
So this is an interesting one. It's come a couple times back to the actual logistics of completing this. What are acceptable page margins? What would you say are acceptable page margins? I would say normal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
You don't
that,
want to go to the edge
yeah, don't
on
go to
it.
the edge. Typical page margins, would be fine. They didn't indicate any type of requirement around that. So normal, page mark. They didn't. Usually, some states do that. Like no, sometimes states, do that. But I think 1 inch, for page margins would probably be appropriate. That's the basic, version of page margins. You don't want to go over that because then it starts to look kind of messy. So I think that when it comes down to it, that's probably the best. If you start going in and getting it more, you're going to limit your page length because it's going to push it down, right? So I think 1 inch would be appropriate for that answer. I don't think you're going to get docked any points for that.
Yeah, some of the stuff you just really want to make it easy for them in normal. So just kind of sticking with
Mhm.
some of the standards.
Mhm. They
Okay,
made it
so
really easy on you. Compared
yeah,
to
relatively speaking. I mean, it's still
yeah.
not easy by any means, but
Yeah.
speaking from experience with the other ones. Okay, so back to the finances, because this is definitely a huge area that can make or break an applicant's license. If you don't have a full commitment of funds now, should you submit an amount less than what is necessary? How would you approach that?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that there's different. It depends. First off, it depends if you're applying as a social equity applicant or not, and if you qualify as a, like, let's just start there. Because if you're a social equity applicant, let's just talk about that for a second, and so that way people understand that you can actually say that, hey, listen, I don't have the money now, but this is what I intend on raising. And I intend on even applying for a grant, or a loan from the state, with the with the program there, at a later date, and that should be fine because they're expecting folks to apply for loans at the state to get that level of support. This is the only state in the entire country we've ever seen this before. So that is really awesome. There's a whole fund there available for folks, and I think they're weighing a lot of precedence on it. Let's move over to if you're not a social equity applicant, you could potentially state that you plan on raising funds post license if you're granted a license, and this is how much you're looking to raise. I think that's going to be a harder sale, to be honest. You want to go into this with as much comprehensive detail as possible, and I think that when it comes down to it, it's really about like making sure that you have everything lined up, right? So, but if you decide to go into this saying, hey, listen, I'm going to plan to raise funds now. This is how much funds I have now. This is how much funds I'm trying to raise later with investors, or however you want to look at it. I mean, that's probably pretty adequate, huh?
Yeah. So, kind of a follow-up question with that is, do we know when those state loans and grants are coming out? And I don't think we do at this point, but I would say that if you are working, oh, they are out. Okay. Yeah, maybe you guys have more information.
Let's see. This is pretty recent because, at one point, we hadn't gotten any information on that, but I believe, that organization, I'm trying to look this up now. Where is it at? There's an organization that's doing this.
Okay, well, while you look, okay, so Department of Commerce put them out at the end of last week.
Department of Commerce, that's it.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, great. And so there is that, and then there also is. I know that some of you on here may actually be working with Siki Ballard from Good Tree Capital.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some loan options that outside of what the state is offering. That are coming down the track, including lines of credit that are pretty awesome. So, I do think that showing that in the application that if you're working with Good Tree Capital, that you're working with them, they want to know what's coming down the track. So, these are all areas that are, as we see, like constantly evolving. So again, like we just say, put it all out there. If you've got LOIs, if you've got family and friends who have said, well, I will loan you or invest, 50,000 or above, anything really, get that in writing. And even if it's contingent upon winning the license, that's totally fine. Just put it in writing and include it in the application.
Yeah, I mean, that would be done by a letter of intent. Maybe
right.
even you can even get it to where it's a non-binding letter of intent. But it's better than having nothing. I think that like if you can get investors or get folks to say, hey, we'll sign on as long as you win a license. Mm-hmm. That is very helpful to demonstrate that definition and answer to the one question they're asking in that section, which is, if we grant you a license, do you have access to these funds to be able to?
It's all demonstration at this point. You want to convince the state that you can complete a compliant application and that you have the funds or access to the funds. So okay, let's move on. I see some Exhibit O questions there. So Exhibit O, we're still on Exhibit O. If an applicant chooses to submit supporting documentation for Exhibit O, it must redact any information that would reveal personally identifying information, including but not limited to name, address, social security. Because any supplied supplemental information will have no effect on the applicant's score, failure to redact this information will also have no effect on the applicant's score. That is, failure to redact will also have no effect on the applicant's score. Is that, I don't know.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Well, it's not really a question, it's a statement. It's stating that, failure to redact, since the applicant choose to submit. I'm going to go on to the next Exhibit O question, unless somebody has more question about that. Again, we just say redact, just to be safe. The above answer to Exhibit O contradicts what was just stated by the panelists. Yes, true. The last sentence clearly states that the supplemental information will have no effect on an applicant's score. I am not going to say that that is actually true, because we have seen in a lot of other states that supplemental information, if it's not redacted appropriately, it can actually affect. We don't know how unless it's actually clearly stated in there that it will have no effect, which they're stating that that might be true, but we always do the error on the side of safety and redact. Otherwise, if you then lose points for something like that, well, then that's means to go back to the state for if they didn't actually follow through on what they said they were
And
going to do.
again, there's that that catch where if there is a problem with that document, you're going to receive a deficiency letter and have 10 days to correct it, right? So the most important thing is to be able to follow those instructions when that happens, right? So they'll let you know and notify you that, hey, look, you need to redact this, or hey, you don't need to redact this.
But as we're seeing, like in the state of Missouri and in other states, the state does not actually always explain things clearly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we err on the side of safety.
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, when you have a blind scoring system and you have a third party scoring it, they're doing this black and white, right? So there's no like the communication between these two departments, or the state agency and this third party agencies. You're going to find difficulties and errors in there too as well. So it's really about just doing everything you can at this stage to make sure that you cover all those different areas, right? So we would suggest, go ahead and redacting it.
Yes.
But just the identifying information, that's it.
Yeah, and so the one person just wrote, leaving the names of prestigious organizations and companies that give you credibility. Absolutely. So we're just talking personal identifying factors. So
Correct.
yeah, social security number, redact. Name, redact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If we have somebody that writing the letter and they sign it, let's just say it's a letter of intent, I'm investing in your business, but they're not the actual applicant, or they're not a principal officer, or they're not the business itself, then at that point, that's fine to leave. But when it comes down to any information inside of that, redact all those different things.
Yeah. Usually over redacting, honestly, we've never seen a case where over redacting hurts, except for, as this person stated, you want to keep the prestigious, anything that is actually going to give you leverage, names of things that's going to give you leverage that is not a personal identifier, you don't need to redact that. So all right, so let's move on. Social equity requirements. Is it and or as mentioned? So there are 3 social equity requirements in order to be qualified as a social equity applicant.
Mm-hmm.
Zeta, do you want to do this one? You want to?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, 3 different ones. Do you have to meet all of them? Can you meet just one of them?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the third one and perhaps some of the common confusion that we get with that one?
Yeah, I mean, the evidence of status as a social equity applicant, first they label it as optional. We always know it's required, right? If you're a social equity applicant, this is not an optional thing, because this is worth like 50 points. So I think that, when it comes down to it, having evidence of the applicant status as an Illinois resident, demonstrated by, a signed lease agreement, or, first you have to have that, right? So you want to make sure that you are an Illinois resident. You want to have evidence that the person that is a social equity applicant owns and controls 51% or more of the dispensary organization, and has lived in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 of the preceding 10 years.
Or
No, in number 2 it says that you have to have lived in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 of the preceding 10 years. This is one way of doing it. Okay.
Yeah, it's one way.
Yeah, so but it's limited. It's you need to demonstrate, but not limited to, like things like tax filings, voter registration, leases, mortgages, paychecks, stubs, utility bills. These kinds of things can demonstrate that you lived in this area. Then there's the owning 51% or more. If you've been arrested or convicted of, or expungement of the Public Act 101-0027, right? and that you have qualified for that specific section. That's another way to do it. And then of course there's also, you can have a legal spouse or guardian and they own 51% or more. And then that the dependent of an individual who prior to June 25th, 2019 was arrested, convicted of, or adjudicated delinquent for the offense of the same offense, right? So this can all be, you can research this all in the Public Act of 101-0027.
So the short answer is that it's one of the three.
It's one of those. Now we have gotten the question where does it make sense to qualify for two of these, meaning that you fit one of those three, but then you're trying to hire 51% or more of the 10 or more full-time employees.
Well, let's be very clear on what that one is, because that means that that third one, you have to already be employing those individuals at that time.
At that time. So that's, so really, I think that's honestly, if I was just going with that, I think that would be weaker than having qualifying as a social equity applicant and owning 51% or more. That's really the strongest one. I mean, honestly, the strongest one is being, either women-owned business and social equity applicant, or veteran social equity applicant, and then, owning 100% of the business. Honestly.
Do you get points for being a women-owned and minority-owned business?
I think that that's really kind of hard to tell.
If you're also social equity.
They haven't defined it. We're only talking about social equity here. Okay, so when we talk about this, I think that in the terms of scoring the highest amount of points in this section, that I think it's going to help. I don't think it's going to hurt to be a women-owned or veteran-owned or all three of the above and putting it into this section, or qualifying for that. I think that it's really important to understand that, like, look, we just need to qualify for one of these things, and I think you're going to score pretty high. But is it going to hurt to have that? No, it's not going to hurt.
Well, it's not going to hurt, but the question was, does it help to be a female minority social equity applicant? I think yes. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they're going to get additional points. They'll get the social equity points, but I don't think that there is in the application anything about it being a female-run business.
Yeah, it doesn't state that in here at all.
Minority owned. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't state that in here at all, being a women-owned business. But again, when we think about, a woman-owned social equity applicant, it's not just about this section here, right? It has a lot more to do with how you sprinkle that information in between all the different exhibits, and how does that play a role in the presentation to the State Department, right? So for this particular section of social equity, we just got to meet one of these requirements to get the points. But coming back to it, it's like I think it's a really good approach to demonstrate how, and say in the narrative of other sections, how you are a women-owned social equity applicant.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you have to currently live in the area to be a social equity applicant?
I believe so. I believe it does state that.
You have to currently live. I thought it was just the majority of the last 10 years.
Oh, it's 5 of the preceding 10 years. 5 of the it's 5 of the preceding 10 years, as demonstrated by some of the
So I could have lived in an area 5 years ago for 5 years and qualify?
Yeah, it says essentially right on the application, it states this, that you had to have lived in a disproportionately impacted area for 5 of the preceding 10 years, right? So there's a map. There's actually an ArcGIS map, interactive map on the state's website that shows the map of these particular areas. And so you want to make sure that you can look at that map and make sure that you had lived in that area for 5 of the preceding 10 years. So for the last 5 years.
Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the questions just to make sure that we're getting them. But we've got about 10, 15 more minutes left. So if you have any more questions, please shoot them our way. Okay, so principal officer forms along with addendum A's through E should be one PDF.
Let's see here. So we got addenda, and some of that addenda, should be, actually, let's take a look at this real quick. Just give me 1 second. Yeah, some of that, all that addenda needs to be included, right? And there's certain addenda that doesn't need to be included. If you had, put, oh, so let me pull this up real quick. Give me 1 second, guys. 1 second. Where's it? Oh,
The question is not whether to include it, is if it should be one PDF.
yeah, yeah, because it's the same, it's labeled the same, right? So you
Okay.
need to include all your principal officers' forms and the addenda for each one, but it's labeled the same, right? But I think addenda B is a table of organization, so you don't need to include that. So I think that it's really, it's addenda, we'll see, it looks like D and E,
Okay.
okay?
Should you include a full business plan in the financials exhibit? Do you mean like a full 50-page business plan, or do you mean like the financials, like a financial pro forma?
I think that like I mean, like a full scale business plan. Look, for Exhibit O, they don't give you a page limit in that section,
Mhm.
right? So if the business plan is focused really on the financial capitalization, doesn't talk about products and services, doesn't talk about the management team, doesn't talk about any of this other stuff, then maybe so. Can it hurt? I don't think it's going to hurt. Now, a full scale business plan about your organization, that would be pretty extensive. And so I don't think that you should include that. Now, what you should include in that of the business plan could be a financial summary, and then past financial summaries, financial projections, right? And maybe sources, uses, all the different things that are associated with that financial projection. But just having a financial summary and that, I think is good enough. I don't think you need a full scale 50-page business plan in that section, at all.
But a solid financial summary is helpful.
Well, financial summary and
Pro
projections is
forma, yeah.
good, or if
Projections,
it's
pro
just a
forma,
financial
yeah.
summary, that's fine too. But I think it's just how do you compound that section to make it the strongest that it possibly could be, and it's all those different layers of documents that we're explaining earlier, including that.
Okay. Cool. All right. I think I'm just looking through the questions here. Just to clarify, for social equity applicants who want to hire 10 people who are social equity applicant, our dispensary has to hire and pay them before we submit the licensing application. That is accurate. So when you submit the application, they actually need to be on payroll already.
Well, they need to be employed, yes.
Employed and yeah, getting paid. That's the key differentiator there that is confusing and makes us ask why. And so
Right.
we kind of think that that's probably for the purpose of a lot of the companies that are already existing, that want to come in and apply for this as a social equity applicant. So I mean, that's just a thought. I don't know, Zeta, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's really the state's way and path in which it weeds out a lot of the different applicants that come from out of state and they're like, I'm going to hire these
Oh
people.
yeah, and pass
Right?
out a whole bunch of LOIs,
Yeah.
then they get the
It's not
license,
this
and
guy's
then
out,
they
right?
say, see ya.
Because it's
Yeah.
just like the integrity is not there, right? So I think it's really kind of like their methodology in which they're like, okay, in order for you to qualify for that section, you need to already have these people employed. They're already locked in. They already have an employment contract, and they're already on payroll. And so this way, the state knows that you're serious about it and that you're actually going to follow through. Whereas it avoids the whole challenge of honestly targeting some of these big corporations coming in and targeting social equity applicants in order to leverage them to help win the license, right?
So what does that mean? Like if what does that mean? That would mean that they would need to have, I guess, their tax forms all filled out. Whatever is considered
W-9 or W-2, right? I think that's really the
not
key.
W-9. That's
Sorry, not W-9.
contractor. So it would be Illinois State W-2, whatever is compliant for Illinois State in order to be an employee. That's what you would need to do. So it may be that W-2 form and the I-9 and the collection of their license, and a paycheck. So they need to already be being paid. So what that means for paycheck, I don't know. I think that could be up for interpretation. If it's, I have no idea.
Mhm.
Do you, Zeta, like what would,
Um,
if that was the route that you were going?
mhm.
Because it's just as easy to fill out a W-2 and to get that sort of thing taken care of. But then, there's also paying, and then you got to make sure that the taxes are, just all of the things in running a business that, you got your employees taken care of in that way. By
Well,
the
again,
second.
like, I mean, when you think about it, it's like, okay, we're starting a new company to apply for the license.
Mhm.
We're trying to qualify for this section. And so, out of the 10 employees, 51% or more, let's just say that's 6 employees.
Mhm.
Out of those 6 employees will have their W-2, will have their employment contract,
Mhm.
and we just started, right?
Well,
So
it'd be an offer letter. It wouldn't be an
our
employment.
offer letter, however you want to look at it. I think that more importantly is just to have that supplemental information. If the department comes back and says, "Hey, we need more information," they'll tell you that, right? But to qualify for that section, I think that would probably be the most appropriate. But that W-2 needs to be filled out, and having the offer letter in place at the very least, right? You may come into this where you're already operating in a minority, business enterprise, and qualify for that, and already licensed and working with minorities. So I think that in that case, you would just transfer all your existing employees over to this, and you would already have that documentation. They'd already be employed, right? So utilizing either that information or starting off with a new company and doing it that way, I think would suffice for this section and qualify you.
Yeah. Yeah. So a comment, that, yeah, it makes no sense for to pay people before opening.
No, no, no,
So
no.
it's
Yeah,
meant to keep away corporations who would apply for social equity. So um, let's hope so.
yeah.
All right. So let's
What else we
see.
got?
I'm just rolling through the questions here. If you guys have any other questions, the submission is January 2nd, if you needed a reminder. And hopefully this has been helpful for you. Possible economic opportunity zone. Sam, do you want to be more precise about
Right.
what the question is? Oh,
That was in reference to the last
okay.
one.
That's Sam, everybody. Give him a little round of applause for putting this together last minute over the holidays. So I think this is gonna conclude. This is going to conclude our webinar here. I want to thank you all for joining. We actually had a pretty large group here and a lot of really good questions. All questions when it comes down to this are good questions. So again, if you have more questions over the next couple days, please email us, ly@greenrushconsulting.com. That is Lee, who is on duty, answering all of your messages, all of your questions as they come. If you have not yet already received everything from us that you are seeking to receive, please let us know. We want to make sure that you guys feel that you have the support that you need to get through this process. I want to thank Sam. Thank you very much, Sam. And the Green Rush team for helping to put this together, and for Zeta, thanks for letting us throw a whole bunch of questions your way, firing range style. Um, so so I guess we'll conclude it there. Thank you, everyone, and stay calm and keep going. You got this.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much, and have a safe and happy holiday, New Year. And best of luck to you. We're glad to hear that we're here to support you. So, good luck, and make sure you make it there early on the 2nd. If you're going there on the 2nd, be there as early as possible. You never know the weather, the traffic, parking space.
Let's keep that winning mindset going. Winning, and then we want to hear when the results come out. If how you guys fared.
Great.
Got this.
All right,
Okay.
guys.
All
Good luck.
right. Bye, everyone.